I learned that invisibility is a skill long before I understood it was also a prison. For 7 years, I had been a shadow in the halls of Thornhill Manor, a figure so unremarkable that the family could pass me on the stairs without truly seeing me at all. My name is Emily Ashford, though I doubt more than 3 people in that grand house could have told you so with certainty. I was 24 years old that autumn, the season when everything changed, though I did not know it yet as I polished the silver in the morning room while rain drummed against the windows. The work was monotonous, soothing in its predictability. I had learned to find peace in repetition, in the simple rhythm of cloth against metal, in the way I could disappear into the task and let my mind wander to places far beyond these walls. I had not always been a maid. Once, a lifetime ago, I had been the daughter of a scholar, a man who filled our small cottage with books in languages I could barely pronounce. My father had been a translator for merchants and travelers, a man who could move between English, French, Italian, and German as easily as stepping from one room to another. He taught me everything he knew, not because he believed I would need such skills, but because he delighted in sharing the beauty of words, the way a single phrase could carry different meanings depending on the tongue that shaped it. Then he died. A fever took him in the space of 3 days, and suddenly I was alone, 17 years old, with no family and no means of support. The choice had been simple: find employment or starve. Thornhill Manor had needed a scullery maid, and I had been grateful for even that. Over the years, I had worked my way up to housemaid, though the distinction meant little beyond slightly cleaner hands and access to rooms where sunlight actually reached. The Duke of Blackwood rarely noticed servants. To him, we were furniture that occasionally moved, performing tasks that kept his world functioning without requiring his attention or gratitude. He was 38 that year, a man carved from ice and duty, his dark hair always perfectly arranged, his gray eyes distant and unreadable. He had inherited the title at 21 when his father died, and in the 17 years since, he had transformed Thornhill from a profitable estate into a fortress of efficiency and coldness. I had seen him smile exactly twice in 7 years. Once at a letter from his solicitor, and once at a painting of his mother, long dead, that hung in the portrait gallery. Both times, the expression had vanished so quickly, I wondered if I had imagined it. That morning, as I finished with the silver and moved to dust the shelves in the library, I heard voices raised in the entrance hall. It was unusual. The Duke did not tolerate shouting in his home, and his voice, though I heard it now, was tightly controlled, each word clipped and precise. I should have returned to my work. A good servant knows when to be deaf as well as invisible. But something in the tone made me pause at the library door, my dustcloth forgotten in my hands. There were 3 men in the hall. The Duke stood with his back rigid, dressed in his customary black coat and gray waistcoat. Beside him was Mr. Thornby, his solicitor, a nervous man who was currently wringing his hands. And facing them both was a stranger, a man I had never seen before, dressed in rich fabrics that spoke of wealth and foreign elegance. His coat was cut in a style I did not recognize, deep blue with gold embroidery at the cuffs. His hair was dark and oiled, swept back from a handsome face that wore an expression of satisfaction. The stranger was speaking rapidly in a language that flowed like music, his hands gesturing as he talked. I recognized it immediately. Italian. My father's voice echoed in my memory, reading Dante aloud by candlelight, making me repeat phrases until the sounds felt natural on my tongue. The Duke's face had gone pale, then red. Mr. Thornby was stammering something about needing time, about reviewing documents, about this being highly irregular. But it was clear from the stranger's smile that he knew he held power in this moment, and he was enjoying it. I could not hear every word from where I stood, but I caught enough. Property, claim, legal right, documents signed decades ago. The stranger gestured broadly, as if encompassing the entire manor with his hands, and said something that made the Duke's jaw tighten until I thought it might crack. Then the stranger switched to broken English, heavily accented and barely comprehensible. "No translate here. You sign now, or I take all tomorrow." The Duke looked at Mr. Thornby, who shook his head helplessly. The solicitor clearly did not speak Italian, and the stranger's English was too fractured to trust. They were trapped, unable to understand the full scope of whatever threat this man posed, unable to argue or negotiate without a translator. I do not know what possessed me in that moment. Perhaps it was 7 years of invisibility finally weighing too heavily. Perhaps it was the memory of my father, the way he had always said that language was a bridge, and those who could cross it had a duty to help others do the same. Or perhaps, though I barely admitted it to myself, it was the look on the Duke's face. Not anger, not in that instant, but something worse: fear, helplessness, the expression of a man watching his world crumble and having no weapon to fight back. I stepped forward before I could convince myself to stop. "Your Grace," I said quietly. All 3 men turned to look at me. The Duke's eyes narrowed slightly, as if trying to place where he had seen me before, if he had seen me at all. Mr. Thornby looked confused. The stranger looked annoyed at the interruption. I curtsied, keeping my eyes lowered as was proper, my heart hammering so hard I was certain they could hear it. "Your Grace, I speak Italian. If you require a translator, I could be of service." The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour, though it could only have been seconds. I kept my gaze on the polished marble floor, on the black and white squares that seemed to swim in my vision. The Duke's voice, when it came, was sharp with disbelief. "You speak Italian." It was not a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes, Your Grace. My father was a translator. He taught me several languages before he passed." Another pause, then, "Prove it." I looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time in 7 years of service. They were darker than I had realized, not gray, but a deep slate blue. And in them I saw not contempt, but desperate calculation. He was weighing whether to trust me, whether to believe that this invisible maid could possibly possess a skill he so desperately needed. I turned to the stranger and spoke in Italian, letting the words flow naturally, asking him his name and the nature of his business with the Duke. The man's eyebrows rose in surprise, then pleasure. Finally, he said in Italian, "Someone in this frozen country who speaks with civilization." He bowed slightly to me, which made my cheeks burn. "I am Count Alessandro Ricci from Naples, and I have come to claim what is rightfully mine." I translated his words for the Duke, keeping my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Then I added, "He says he has documents proving ownership of Thornhill Manor and the surrounding lands. He claims they were signed by your grandfather in payment of a gambling debt." The Duke's face went white. "That is impossible," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The Count produced a leather folder from inside his coat, thick with papers, each covered in dense script and official seals. He spoke again in Italian, and I translated. He says the debt was for £50,000. Your grandfather signed over the property as collateral, with the agreement that if the debt was not paid within 30 years, ownership would transfer to the Ricci family. That period ended 3 months ago. Mr. Thornby made a strangled sound. "Your Grace, we must examine these documents immediately. This cannot be legal. There must be some error." But I could see in the Duke's eyes that he knew there was no error. He had the look of a man who had just been told that the ground beneath his feet had never been solid at all, that he had been walking on ice his entire life, and now it had finally cracked. The Count spoke again, longer this time, his tone becoming more magnanimous. I translated each word. "He says he is not an unreasonable man. He understands that this comes as a shock. He is willing to give you 1 week to review the documents and prepare to vacate the property. He says he has already made arrangements to take possession of Thornhill and will arrive with his own household staff on the 15th of November. 1 week, 7 days to upend an entire life, to dismantle centuries of family legacy." The Duke stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides. Then he turned to me, and I saw something in his face I had never expected to see directed at a servant. Not gratitude, not yet, but recognition. He was seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time. "You will come with me to my study," he said. "You will translate every word of these documents, every clause, every condition. I need to understand exactly what I am facing." "Yes, Your Grace," I whispered. He gestured to the Count, then to me. "Tell him we will meet tomorrow morning at 9 to discuss this further. Tell him he may stay at the inn in the village, and I will send word when we are ready." I translated, and the Count smiled, inclined his head, and swept toward the door with the confidence of a man who had already won. As he passed me, he said in Italian, "You have a gift for languages, signorina. Such a waste to be polishing silver in this cold place. Perhaps when the manor is mine, I will have better use for you." I did not translate that. I did not need to see the Duke's face darken further. When the Count was gone, Mr. Thornby began to speak rapidly about legal precedents and appeals, but the Duke held up one hand to silence him. "Not now, Thornby. Leave the documents and go. I will send for you tomorrow." The solicitor scurried away, casting nervous glances at me as if I were somehow responsible for this disaster. And then I was alone with the Duke in that vast entrance hall, the leather folder of documents sitting on the marble table between us like a coiled snake. He picked up the folder, held it for a moment, then looked at me. "What is your name?" "Emily Ashford, Your Grace." "How long have you worked here, Emily Ashford?" 7 years, Your Grace." 7 years, he repeated, and something bitter crossed his face. 7 years, and I never knew your name. Never knew you could be of more use than polishing my silverware. I said nothing. What could I say to that? He gestured toward the corridor that led to his private study. "Come, we have work to do." And then, as an afterthought, as if the words were foreign to him, "Thank you for stepping forward." It was the first time in 7 years that anyone in Thornhill Manor had thanked me for anything. I followed him down the corridor, my heart still racing, my mind reeling with what I had just done. I had made myself visible. I had placed myself directly in the path of whatever storm was about to break over this house. And I had no idea if I had just saved the Duke or sealed both our fates. The Duke's study was a room I had cleaned 100 times but never truly inhabited. It was all dark wood and leather, heavy curtains that blocked out most of the daylight, and shelves lined with books that looked as though they had not been opened in years. A fire burned in the grate, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and the air smelled of smoke and old paper and something else, something masculine and distant that I would come to associate with him alone. He gestured to a chair across from his massive desk, an invitation that felt impossibly strange. Servants did not sit in the Duke's study. Servants did not sit in the presence of the Duke at all, unless they were ill or being dismissed. But I lowered myself into the leather chair, feeling its unfamiliar softness, and watched as he took his own seat and opened the leather folder between us. The documents were extensive, page after page of dense Italian script interspersed with legal terminology that would have been challenging even in English. I leaned forward, and the Duke pushed the first page toward me, his movements careful, controlled. His hands, I noticed for the first time, were not the soft hands of a man who had never worked. There were faint scars across his knuckles, and his fingers were long and capable. I wondered what had marked them, what labor or accident had left those traces. "Read it aloud," he said. "Translate as you go." "I need to hear every word," I began. The document was dated 1794, 31 years ago. It detailed a card game in a gentleman's club in London, a night when the previous Duke of Blackwood, the current Duke's grandfather, had lost catastrophically to Count Antonio Ricci, the father of the man who had stood in the entrance hall today. The debt had been staggering, £50,000, a sum that would have ruined the family. In desperation, the old Duke had offered Thornhill Manor and all its holdings as collateral, with the agreement that if the debt was not repaid within 30 years, ownership would transfer to the Ricci family. The Duke listened without interruption, his face a mask that revealed nothing. But I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed once, twice, against the desk before he stilled them. I continued reading. There were clauses about maintenance of the property, stipulations about the transfer of ownership, legal language that wound through the pages like thorns. And then, near the end of the 4th page, I found something that made my breath catch. "Your Grace," I said quietly, "there is a clause here. It states that the debt could be forgiven entirely if certain conditions were met within the 30-year period." His eyes snapped to mine. "What conditions?" I read carefully, making sure I understood the Italian correctly before translating. If the Blackwood family could prove that the Ricci family engaged in any fraudulent activity in the creation of this contract, or if the Blackwood family could demonstrate that the original card game was conducted unfairly or under duress, the contract would be considered void. The Duke leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from blank control to something sharper, more calculating. "So there is a way out, if we can prove fraud or coercion." I hesitated. "Your Grace, this was 31 years ago. Any witnesses to that card game would likely be dead or impossible to locate, and proving fraud after so long would require documentation that may no longer exist." He was silent for a long moment, staring at the papers as if he could will them to reveal some hidden truth. Then he said, "My grandfather kept journals, detailed records of his daily activities, his business dealings, his social engagements. If there was anything suspicious about that night, he might have noted it." "Do you have access to these journals?" I asked. "They are in the estate archive, hundreds of volumes, covering decades. It would take weeks to search through them all." "I could help," I said before I could stop myself. "I can read quickly, and if you tell me what to look for, what details might be relevant, I could assist in the search." He studied me for a long moment, and I felt exposed under that gaze, as if he were seeing not just my face, but something deeper, something I usually kept hidden behind the mask of servitude. "Why would you do this?" he asked. "You owe me nothing. If this estate falls to the Count, you would simply find employment elsewhere." The question caught me off guard. I had not examined my own motivations, had not asked myself why I had stepped forward in the entrance hall, why I was offering to spend my limited free hours searching through dusty journals for evidence that might not exist. I could have said it was duty, or gratitude for 7 years of employment, or simple human decency. But sitting there, with the firelight dancing across his face, I realized the truth was more complicated. "Because it matters," I said finally. "This place, this house, it has been your family's home for generations. I have seen you walk these halls, Your Grace. I have seen how you care for this estate, how you work to keep it thriving. To lose it to a gambling debt from before you were born, to have your entire world taken because of another man's mistakes, that is not justice, that is cruelty." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the ice. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, less formal. "You have a gift for words, Miss Ashford. And for observation, it seems. Tell me, what else have you observed in your 7 years of invisibility in my home?" The question was pointed, almost a challenge, but there was curiosity beneath it, genuine interest. I thought carefully before answering. "I have observed that you rise before dawn every morning and walk the estate grounds before breakfast, regardless of weather. That you spend 3 hours each day in correspondence and accounts. That you visit the tenants' cottages quarterly to inspect conditions and hear grievances. That you read poetry late at night when you think no one is watching, though you would never admit to enjoying something so impractical." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You have been watching me." "No, Your Grace. I have simply been present." "There is a difference." He almost smiled, almost. Instead, he turned back to the documents. "Continue reading." I want to know every detail of this contract, every loophole, every possible weakness. We worked through the afternoon and into the evening, the room growing darker until the Duke had to light more candles. Mrs. Hartley, the housekeeper, brought tea at one point, her eyes widening when she saw me sitting across from the Duke like an equal. I saw the questions in her face, the scandal brewing, but she said nothing, merely set down the tray and withdrew in disapproving silence. The documents revealed a web of legal complications. The contract had been witnessed by 4 men, all presumably dead. It had been registered with an Italian court, which added layers of international law that made my head spin. And there were financial details, schedules of payment that the old Duke had never met, promises he had never fulfilled. But there was also hope, thin as it was. The contract referenced letters of correspondence between the 2 men, letters that might contain evidence of fraud or coercion. If those letters still existed, if they were in the archives alongside the journals, we might have a chance. By the time the clock struck 9, my eyes were burning from the strain of reading in candlelight, and my throat was dry from hours of translating. The Duke seemed not to notice the passage of time, his focus absolute, his mind clearly working through strategies and possibilities. Finally, he closed the last document and leaned back, pressing his fingers against his temples. Tomorrow morning, you will begin searching the archives. Take whatever time you need away from your other duties. Mrs. Hartley will reassign your work. This takes precedence over everything. Yes, Your Grace. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw exhaustion in his eyes and something else. Vulnerability, perhaps. The weight of responsibility worn openly for just a moment before he pulled the mask back into place. Miss Ashford, I do not make a habit of relying on servants for matters of this importance, but I find myself in your debt already. Thank you for your assistance today. There it was again, gratitude, acknowledgement. I stood, clutching the armrests to steady myself after sitting for so long, and curtsied. I am glad to be of service, Your Grace. As I turned to leave, he spoke again. Emily. I froze. He had never used my given name before. I turned back, waiting. I will not let him take this place without a fight. Whatever is in those archives, whatever evidence exists, we will find it. And when we do, we will make certain that Italian charlatan understands that Thornhill Manor does not belong to him. It belongs to England. It belongs to my family. It belongs to me. The intensity in his voice sent a shiver through me. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and left the study. In the corridor, I pressed my back against the wall and took a shaking breath. What had I done? In the space of a single day, I had gone from invisible maid to confidant, from furniture to ally. I had sat in his study like a guest, had spoken to him like an equal, had heard him say my name with something that sounded almost like warmth. And I had felt something stir in my chest when he looked at me, something dangerous and impossible that I could not afford to acknowledge. He was the Duke of Blackwood. I was a housemaid. Between us lay an ocean of class and propriety, of rules and expectations that had been forged over centuries. To even imagine crossing that divide was not just foolish, it was potentially ruinous. But as I made my way back to the servants' quarters, I could not stop replaying the afternoon in my mind. The sound of his voice as he listened to me translate. The way his eyes had met mine when he asked why I was helping. The almost smile that had flickered across his face when I admitted to watching him read poetry. I was in terrible danger, I realized. Not from the Count or his claim to the estate, but from something far more insidious. I was beginning to care about the Duke, not as an employer or a distant figure of authority, but as a man who was fighting to save everything he loved, a man who, for the first time, had seen me as something more than a shadow. The other servants were already asleep when I reached my small room under the eaves. I lit a candle and sat on my narrow bed, still wearing my uniform, my mind too restless for sleep. Tomorrow, I would begin searching the archives. Tomorrow, I would dig through decades of history, looking for evidence that might save Thornhill Manor. Tomorrow, I would spend hours in close proximity to the Duke, working alongside him as if we were partners rather than master and servant. Tomorrow, I would have to guard my heart more carefully than ever before, because I could already feel it beginning to betray me, beginning to imagine possibilities that could never exist in the cold reality of our world. I blew out the candle and lay in darkness, listening to the wind howl outside my window and the soft breathing of the maid who slept in the room next to mine. And I wondered, not for the first time that day, if stepping forward in the entrance hall had been an act of courage or an act of catastrophic foolishness. I would not have long to wonder. The next morning, as I descended to the archives in the East Wing, carrying a lamp and wearing my oldest work dress because I knew I would be covered in dust by day's end, I had no idea that what I would find in those boxes and journals would change everything, not just for the Duke and his fight against the Count, but for me, for my understanding of who I was and what I had been running from all these years. The archives were cold and windowless, lined with shelves that reached to the ceiling, each one crammed with boxes, ledgers, and leather-bound journals. The Duke had given me a list of years to focus on, the decades surrounding the fateful card game, and I began pulling volumes methodically, stacking them on a long table that occupied the center of the room. The dust was thick, undisturbed for years, and it coated my hands and dress almost immediately. I worked in silence, broken only by the scratch of pages turning and the occasional creak of the old building settling around me. The journals were written in the old Duke's hand, elegant but cramped, entries detailing everything from crop yields to dinner parties to the weather. I read for hours, my eyes straining in the lamplight, searching for any mention of Count Ricci or gambling or debts. There were plenty of references to cards, to nights at various clubs, to wins and losses. The old Duke had been a gambler, that much was clear, and not a particularly successful one. But nothing about that specific night, nothing about the contract that now threatened to destroy his grandson's life. I was beginning to lose hope when I opened a journal dated April 1794, and there, on a page marked by a faded ribbon, I found an entry that made my blood run cold. Tonight at the Clarence Club, I played cards with Antonio Ricci. The man cheated, I am certain of it. The way he handled the deck, the looks exchanged with his associate, everything about the evening felt orchestrated. But I have no proof, and to accuse a Count of cheating without evidence would be social suicide. I have lost £50,000, a debt I cannot possibly pay. Ricci suggested I sign over Thornhill as collateral, and like a fool, I agreed. I was drunk, desperate, and terrified. I signed papers I barely read, in a language I do not fully understand. God forgive me. I have mortgaged my family's future for my own weakness. My hands were shaking as I read the words again, then a third time. Here it was, evidence that the old Duke believed he had been cheated. Not proof, not the kind of concrete evidence that would hold up in court, but something, a starting point. I marked the page carefully and continued reading. 2 entries later, another revelation. I have made inquiries about Ricci. The man is known in certain circles as a card sharp, a con artist who uses his title to gain access to respectable clubs and then fleeces wealthy fools like myself. But he is protected by his family connections and his Italian citizenship. No English court would hear a case against him. I am trapped. I will have to find some way to pay the debt or risk losing everything my father and grandfather built. I sat back, my mind racing. This was exactly what we needed. Testimony, even second-hand testimony, that Count Ricci's father had been a known cheat. If we could find others who had been cheated by him, if we could build a case that the entire transaction had been fraudulent from the beginning, we might be able to invalidate the contract. I was so absorbed in reading that I did not hear the door open behind me. I did not realize I was no longer alone until a voice, cold and heavily accented, spoke from the shadows. So the little maid is a detective now, How very enterprising. I spun around, nearly knocking over the lamp. Count Alessandro Ricci stood in the doorway, his expression pleasant, but his eyes calculating. He was alone, which somehow made his presence more menacing. "The archives are not open to visitors," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You should not be here." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I could be in the village inn, bored and waiting for your duke to admit defeat. Or I could be here, learning what desperate measures he is taking to avoid the inevitable." He glanced at the journals spread across the table. "Tell me, Signorina, have you found anything interesting in these dusty old books?" I moved instinctively to block his view of the marked journal. "That is not your concern." "Oh, but it is." He smiled, moving closer. "You see, I know what you are looking for. Evidence of fraud, of cheating, anything to discredit my father and break the contract. It is a clever strategy, but ultimately it is pointless." "Why?" I asked, more to keep him talking than because I expected a useful answer. "Because even if you find evidence that my father cheated at cards, it changes nothing. The contract was signed, witnessed, and registered with the proper authorities. Your duke's grandfather signed it while sober, in the presence of his own solicitor. He had every opportunity to read the terms, to negotiate, to refuse. That he chose to sign out of desperation does not make the contract invalid. It makes him a fool. There was truth in his words, and it burned. But I refused to let him see my despair. The courts will decide that, not you." He laughed. A sound without genuine humor. "You have spirit. I will give you that. It is a pity you waste it serving a man who has never appreciated you. Tell me, in 7 years, did the Duke ever once ask your name before yesterday?" The question hit like a physical blow because we both knew the answer. I said nothing. I thought not. Ricci moved closer still, close enough that I could smell cologne and wine on him. "When I take possession of Thornhill, I will need staff, competent staff, staff with useful skills. You could stay on, Miss Ashford. Under my employment, you would not be invisible. I would make very good use of your talents." The way he said it made my skin crawl. "I am not interested in your employment, Count Ricci." "No," he murmured. "You are loyal to your duke. How very touching. But loyalty to a sinking ship is just another form of drowning, Signorina. When Thornhill becomes mine, as it will in 6 days, you would do well to remember my offer." He turned and walked toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. The Duke should know that I have already contracted with buyers for much of the estate's furnishings and art. The paintings, the furniture, the library. All of it will be sold to pay for renovations I plan to make. By the time I am finished, there will be nothing left of the Blackwood legacy but ghosts and memories." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the cold archives with a journal full of accusations and a sick feeling in my stomach that we were running out of time. I did not return to the archives that day. After Count Ricci left, I stood trembling in the cold room, staring at the journals scattered across the table, my mind replaying his words. "When Thornhill becomes mine, the paintings sold, the furniture auctioned, the library dismantled, everything that made this place a home reduced to profit and loss." I gathered the marked journals carefully, cradling them against my chest as I climbed the stairs back to the main house. My hands were still shaking from fear or anger or both, and I nearly dropped the stack twice before I reached the Duke's study. I knocked, heard his distracted call to enter, and pushed open the heavy door. He was standing at the window, his back to me, hands clasped behind him in a posture I had come to recognize as his thinking stance. He did not turn when I entered. "Yes, Miss Ashford. What have you found?" "I have found evidence, Your Grace. But I have also had an encounter that you should know about." That made him turn. His eyes found mine immediately, sharp and alert. What kind of encounter? I told him everything. Count Ricci's appearance in the archives, his veiled threats, his confidence that the contract was unbreakable, his plans to strip Thornhill of everything valuable. The Duke's face darkened with each sentence, a storm gathering behind his eyes. He came here, into my home, into a private archive. He stepped closer, and I could see the barely controlled fury in the set of his jaw. That man has no respect for boundaries or propriety. He is testing us, seeing how far he can push before we break. I think he is also trying to frighten me, I said quietly. He offered me employment. When the estate becomes his. The Duke's eyes flashed. What did you tell him? I told him I was not interested, that I was loyal to Thornhill. Something shifted in his expression, softening slightly. You did not have to say that, Miss Ashford. You do not owe me your loyalty. If this estate falls, you should secure your own future, not tie yourself to a sinking ship. It was almost word for word what the Count had said, and hearing it from the Duke's lips felt like a betrayal. I set the journals down on his desk with more force than I intended. Is that what you think, Your Grace? That I am helping you out of obligation, or worse, out of pity? That the moment this becomes difficult, I will abandon the effort and seek easier employment elsewhere? He looked taken aback by my vehemence. I only meant that you should be practical. Practical. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. I have been practical for 7 years. I have kept my head down, done my work, made myself invisible because that is what was practical. But practicality does not save estates, Your Grace. It does not fight injustice or stand against men like Count Ricci. If we are going to win this, we need more than practicality. We need conviction. The silence that followed was heavy. The Duke stared at me as if seeing me for the first time all over again, as if each conversation revealed another layer he had never suspected existed beneath the maid's uniform. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. You are right. Forgive me. I am not accustomed to having allies in my battles, Miss Ashford. I have fought alone for so long that I have forgotten how to trust anyone else to stand beside me. Then it is time you learned, I said. Because you are not alone in this. Not anymore. He held my gaze for a long moment, and I felt something pass between us, unspoken, but profound. An understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of something more dangerous that neither of us was ready to name. Show me what you found, he said finally, gesturing to the journals. I opened to the marked pages and watched his face as he read his grandfather's words. The accusations of cheating, the admission of being drunk and desperate, the knowledge that Antonio Ricci was known as a card sharp. With each revelation, the Duke's expression grew more focused, more determined. This is good, he said when he finished. Not enough to invalidate the contract on its own, but good. If we can find others who were cheated by Antonio Ricci, if we can establish a pattern of fraud, we might have a case. He looked up at me. Can you write to the Italian authorities? Inquire about Antonio Ricci's reputation, any legal complaints filed against him. I can write the letters, Your Grace. Whether the Italian authorities will respond to a request from an English housemaid is another question. Then I will sign them. You will write them, I will add my seal and signature, and we will send them by express post today. He moved to his desk, pulling out fresh paper and ink. We have 6 days, Miss Ashford. 6 days to build a case that took 31 years to create. It is not enough time. But it is what we have. We worked through the morning, composing letters in Italian to courts in Naples, to the Clarence Club in London where the card game had taken place, to anyone who might have records or memories of Antonio Ricci's activities in 1794. I wrote, the Duke dictated, and slowly we built a strategy from desperation and hope. At midday, Mrs. Hartley appeared with a lunch tray, her disapproval radiating like heat. Your Grace, the household staff are beginning to talk. Miss Ashford has been absent from her duties for 2 days now, and there are rumors that she is spending all her time in your private study. Alone, with the door closed. The implication was clear, and I felt my cheeks burn. But the Duke's voice, when he responded, was ice. The household staff will concern themselves with their own duties, Mrs. Hartley, and leave Miss Ashford to hers. She is working on a matter of urgent importance to this estate at my direct command. If anyone has questions about the propriety of this arrangement, they may bring them to me personally. I doubt they will find the conversation pleasant. Mrs. Hartley's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes, Your Grace, but I must warn you that appearances matter, particularly when the estate is already facing uncertainty. If word reaches the village that you are closeted with a housemaid for hours at a time, it will not reflect well on either of you. Noted, the Duke said flatly. You may go. She left in a rustle of skirts and indignation, and I sat very still, mortified. I had not considered how this would look to others. A servant, suddenly elevated to confidant, spending long hours alone with her employer. The scandal was already brewing, I could feel it, and when it broke fully, it would destroy what little reputation I had. I should return to my regular duties, I said quietly. Find another maid to help with the correspondence. Someone whose presence in your study will not cause talk. The Duke set down his pen and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Do you care what they think, Miss Ashford? The other servants, the village gossips. Does their opinion matter to you? Of course it matters. I am not immune to judgment, Your Grace. I am not above needing the respect of my peers. Then tell me this. If you return to scrubbing floors and polishing silver, if you hide away to protect your reputation, what happens to Thornhill? Who will translate the Italian correspondence? Who will help me search the archives and build our case against Ricci? I cannot do this alone, Miss Ashford. I need you. The words hung in the air between us, raw and honest. I need you. How long had it been since anyone had said that to me? How long since I had been needed for something more than my ability to make a room clean or a meal hot? I will stay, I said. Let them talk. Let them think what they will. This is more important than my reputation. Is it? He asked, and there was something searching in his gaze. Or are you sacrificing yourself out of some misguided sense of duty to a man who has never given you reason to care whether he succeeds or fails? The question was so unexpected, so brutally direct, that I had no prepared answer. I could only tell the truth. I am not sacrificing myself, Your Grace. I am choosing to fight for something that matters. This estate matters. The people who live here, the families who depend on these lands for their livelihoods, they matter. And yes, you matter. Not because you are a duke, but because you are a man who has dedicated his entire life to protecting what his family built. That is worth defending. He stood abruptly and turned away, walking back to the window. For a long moment, he was silent, and I wondered if I had overstepped, if my honesty had been too much. Then he spoke, his voice low and strained. You see too much, Miss Ashford. You see things I have spent years trying to hide. What do you hide? I asked, emboldened by his vulnerability. He did not turn around. That I am afraid. Terrified, actually. Not just of losing Thornhill, but of failing everyone who depends on me. Of proving that I am not worthy of this title, this responsibility. Of becoming the kind of man who lets his legacy crumble because he was not strong enough to save it. The confession hung in the air, fragile and honest. I stood and walked to the window, stopping a respectful distance from him, but close enough that he could hear me clearly. You are not that man, Your Grace. I have watched you for 7 years. I have seen how you work yourself to exhaustion, how you make decisions that put your tenants' welfare above your own comfort, how you carry the weight of this entire estate on your shoulders without complaint. You are many things, but weak is not one of them. He turned to look at me then, and the expression on his face was unguarded, vulnerable in a way I had never seen. When I was a boy, my father told me that being a duke meant sacrificing everything personal for the sake of duty. That love, friendship, joy, all of it was secondary to responsibility. I have lived by that principle for 17 years, And it has made me cold, Miss Ashford. It has made me the kind of man who does not notice when a gifted, remarkable woman works in his home for 7 years because he has trained himself not to see servants as people. I am ashamed of that, of the blindness I have cultivated in service of duty. You are seeing me now, I said softly. Yes, and I find that I do not want to stop. Even when this crisis is over, when Count Ricci is defeated or Thornhill is lost, I do not want to go back to being blind. I want to keep seeing you, Miss Ashford. I want to understand who you are beyond the role you have been forced to play. The words sent a shiver through me, dangerous and thrilling. This was not just gratitude speaking. This was something else, something that crossed the careful lines we were supposed to maintain. I should have stepped back, should have reminded him of propriety and station, but I could not. Because I wanted the same thing. I wanted him to keep seeing me. I wanted to keep standing at his side, not as a servant, but as something more. Your Grace, I began, but he shook his head. Gabriel, he said, when we are alone, when we are working together like this, call me Gabriel. I am tired of being just a title, even to you. Gabriel. The name felt strange on my tongue, intimate and forbidden. I cannot, I whispered. It is not proper. Nothing about this situation is proper, Miss Ashford. We are already breaking every rule of decorum. What is one more? Emily, I said, my voice barely audible. If you are Gabriel, then I am Emily. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger, less burdened. Emily. Yes, that suits you better than Miss Ashford. More human, less formal. We stood there at the window, closer than we should have been, looking out at the grounds of Thornhill as the afternoon sun painted everything gold. And I thought, this is the moment. This is when everything changes, when we cross from employer and servant into something else entirely, something that could save us or destroy us both. A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. The Duke, Gabriel, stepped back, his face closing down, becoming the formal mask again. Enter. Mr. Thornby burst in, waving a letter. Your Grace, I have just received word from the Clarence Club. They still have records from 1794, including the night of the card game. They are sending copies by express. We should have them by tomorrow. The Duke's, Gabriel's, eyes lit with hope. That is excellent news, Thornby. And the inquiries to Naples. No response yet, but it has only been a day. International correspondence takes time. Thornby glanced at me, curiosity and concern warring in his expression. Miss Ashford, perhaps you should rest. You look exhausted. I am fine, I said, though it was not entirely true. I had barely slept since this began, my dreams haunted by Italian contracts and the sound of the Count's laughter. Nevertheless, Gabriel said, Thornby is right. We are no use to anyone if we collapse from exhaustion. Take the evening to rest, Emily. We will resume in the morning when the records arrive. I wanted to protest, but the weight of the past 2 days was pressing down on me. Yes, Your Grace, I said, the formality returning automatically in Thornby's presence. As I left the study, I heard Thornby say quietly, Be careful, Your Grace. The servants are talking, and not kindly. You risk much by elevating a housemaid to such a position. And Gabriel's reply, firm and unyielding, Then let them talk, Thornby. Miss Ashford has proven herself worth 10 times the household staff combined. I will not dismiss her talents simply to appease gossip. I walked through the corridors in a daze, my mind spinning. He had defended me. He had called me remarkable. He had asked me to call him Gabriel. And somewhere in the midst of fighting to save his estate, we had begun to see each other not as Duke and maid, but as man and woman, as equals. It was reckless. It was impossible. It was doomed to end in heartbreak. But as I lay in my narrow bed that night, listening to the house settle around me, I could not bring myself to regret it. For the first time in 7 years, I felt truly alive. And I knew, with absolute certainty that whatever happened in the next 4 days would change my life forever. The records from the Clarence Club arrived at dawn, carried by an exhausted messenger who had ridden through the night. I was in the kitchen helping prepare breakfast when Mrs. Hartley summoned me to the Duke's study, her expression tight with disapproval, but her words carefully neutral. "His Grace requires your presence immediately, Miss Ashford." I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried through the corridors, my heart already racing. Gabriel was standing at his desk, the messenger's pouch open before him, documents spread across the leather surface like pieces of a puzzle. He looked up when I entered, and I saw the fire in his eyes, the mixture of hope and determination that had been building over the past 3 days. "Emily, close the door. I need you to translate something." I did as he asked, moving to stand beside him at the desk. The documents were older than I expected, yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. They were written in both English and Italian, detailed records of the card game that had taken place 31 years ago. The Clarence Club kept meticulous notes, Gabriel said, his finger tracing one of the entries. They recorded every player, every bet, even the brands of wine served that evening. And look here. He pointed to a notation at the bottom of one page. 4 witnesses signed statements that evening, verifying the game was conducted fairly, but read the Italian notation beside it. I leaned closer, squinting at the cramped script. "This is strange," I murmured. "It says that one of the witnesses, a man named Paolo Bianchi, later recanted his statement. He claimed he was paid by Antonio Ricci to sign the verification even though he did not actually observe the entire game." Gabriel's hand clenched into a fist on the desk. "When did he recant? Where is his testimony?" According to this, he gave a deposition to an Italian magistrate in 1798, 4 years after the original game. But there is a note here saying the deposition was sealed at the request of the Ricci family, who claimed it was libelous. "So the evidence exists," Gabriel said slowly, "but it was suppressed, hidden away where no one could access it." His eyes met mine. "Can we get access to sealed depositions in Italy?" "Not easily. It would require a court order, and that would take weeks, possibly months. We have 3 days. The hope in his expression flickered, but did not die. "Then we need leverage, something to force the Italian authorities to unseal those documents quickly." He began pacing, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. "What if we could prove that the Ricci family has a history of suppressing evidence, that this is not the first time they have used their influence to hide fraud?" "That would require investigating the entire Ricci family history," I said. "We do not have time for that kind of research." "No, but Count Alessandro might have enemies. Men he has cheated, families he has wronged. If we could find even one person willing to testify against him, willing to pressure the Italian authorities on our behalf, it might be enough." I thought of the Count's confidence, his smug certainty that he would take Thornhill without resistance. He was arrogant, careless in his assumption that no one would challenge him. That kind of arrogance came from a lifetime of getting away with things, which meant there had to be others, other victims, other people who wanted to see him fail. "I may know someone who can help," I said slowly. "A man in the village. His name is Thomas Whitmore. He used to work as a translator for a London firm that dealt with Italian merchants. He has connections in Naples, in Rome. If anyone would know about the Ricci family's reputation, it would be him." Gabriel stopped pacing and looked at me. "Can you speak with him today?" "I can try." "But Your Grace, Gabriel, there is something else we need to consider. Even if we find evidence of fraud, even if we unseal Paolo Bianchi's deposition, Count Ricci still has possession of the original contract. He can argue that regardless of how it was obtained, it was legally signed and registered. Unless we can prove the contract itself is invalid, we may only succeed in delaying the transfer of ownership, not preventing it." His face darkened. "Then what do you suggest?" I hesitated, because what I was about to propose was risky, potentially illegal, and would require us to trust someone we had every reason to distrust. We need to see the original contract again. All of it, not just the pages Count Ricci showed us. If there are any irregularities in the document itself, any signs of forgery or alteration, that would be grounds for invalidation. You want to steal the contract from Ricci, not steal, borrow, long enough to examine it thoroughly to look for inconsistencies. Then return it before he realizes it is missing. Gabriel was silent for a long moment, considering. Finally, he said, "That is dangerous. Emily, if we are caught, it will destroy any legal standing we have. We will look like criminals, and Ricci will have even more ammunition against us. I know. But we are running out of options and time. Sometimes you have to risk everything to save what matters most." He looked at me then, with an expression that made my breath catch. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met, or the most foolish. I have not decided which." "Perhaps I am both," I said quietly. A knock at the door interrupted us. Gabriel called for entry, and Mr. Thornby entered, looking harried. "Your Grace, Count Ricci is here. He is demanding to see you. He says he has important information regarding the transfer of the estate." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Show him to the drawing room. I will be there momentarily." After Thornby left, Gabriel turned to me. "Go to the village, speak with Thomas Whitmore. Find out what he knows about the Ricci family. I will deal with the Count and try to determine where he is keeping the original contract documents, and if he is keeping them on his person. Then we will need to be creative." Gabriel almost smiled. "You have made me reckless. Emily Ashford. A week ago I would never have considered stealing documents or bribing witnesses. Now I find myself planning criminal activities before breakfast." "A week ago you did not know my name," I reminded him. "We have both changed." "Yes. And I find that I do not regret it despite the chaos. I left through the servants' entrance, not wanting to risk encountering Count Ricci in the main halls. The morning was cold and damp, autumn rain threatening from gray clouds that hung low over the estate. I wrapped my cloak tightly around myself and walked quickly down the path toward the village, my mind churning with everything we needed to accomplish in the next 72 hours. Thomas Whitmore lived in a small cottage on the edge of the village, surrounded by gardens that had gone wild for lack of tending. He was an old man now, nearly 70, but his mind was still sharp and his connections still valuable. I had spoken with him occasionally over the years when I visited the village on errands, always in Italian, which seemed to delight him. He answered the door himself, peering at me through spectacles thick as bottle glass. "Miss Ashford, what a pleasant surprise. Come in, come in. You look frozen." His cottage was warm and cluttered, filled with books and papers, maps and correspondence in a dozen languages. He made tea and listened intently as I explained the situation, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "The Ricci family," he said when I finished. "Oh yes, I know them well. Antonio was a scoundrel, and his son Alessandro is worse. More sophisticated, more careful, but fundamentally the same. They have made a fortune over the years through schemes like this. Targeting English aristocrats who gamble beyond their means, rigging the games, then using legal contracts to seize property. Have they done this before?" I asked, leaning forward. "At least 3 times that I know of. A manor in Cornwall, a townhouse in Bath, an entire shipping company in Liverpool. Each time, they claimed legal right through gambling debts or business contracts, and each time, the victims were too ashamed or too frightened to fight back in court. Did any of them try to fight? One did, Lord Pemberton of Cornwall. He hired investigators, gathered evidence, even got as far as a preliminary hearing. But then he died suddenly. A riding accident, they said, though there were whispers it was not so accidental. After that, his family dropped the case, and the Ricci family took possession of the manor without further resistance. Ice slid down my spine. Are you saying Count Ricci murders people who stand in his way? I am saying that the Ricci family is ruthless, and they have connections that reach far beyond Italy. If the Duke challenges this contract, he should be very, very careful. Alessandro Ricci does not like to lose. I swallowed hard, thinking of Gabriel alone in the drawing room with the Count. Do you have any evidence of these other cases? Testimony from the victims' families, legal documents, anything that could establish a pattern? Thomas stood and moved to a large trunk in the corner of the room. He opened it and began pulling out folders, each one thick with papers. I have been collecting information on the Ricci family for years. Call it a hobby, or perhaps an obsession. When I heard Alessandro was in the area, I suspected he was up to his old tricks. He handed me 3 folders. These contain everything I have on the previous cases: depositions, newspaper articles, letters from the victims. It is not enough to convict him of anything, but it might be enough to cast doubt on his claims. May I borrow these? I asked. I promise to return them. Keep them. If they help the Duke save Thornhill, then they have served their purpose. Thomas sat back down, studying me over his teacup. You care about him, do you not? The Duke. This is more than just duty for you. The observation caught me off guard, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I care about justice, I said carefully. Of course you do, but you also care about the man. I can see it in your eyes when you speak of him. Be careful, my dear. The gulf between a duke and a housemaid is vast and rarely crossed without casualties. I know, I whispered. Do you? He set down his cup. Because love makes fools of us all, Emily. It makes us take risks we should not take, trust people we should not trust, hope for things that can never be. If you love the Duke, truly love him, you must ask yourself whether you are helping him or simply tying yourself to his sinking ship out of misguided devotion. The words stung because they echoed my own doubts, the fears that kept me awake at night. I do not know what I feel, I admitted. I only know that walking away is not an option. Not now. Not when he needs me. Thomas smiled sadly. Then you have already made your choice. Go back to Thornhill, Miss Ashford. Help your Duke fight his battle, but guard your heart carefully because I fear that win or lose, you will pay a price for this involvement. I left his cottage with the folders clutched against my chest, his warning ringing in my ears. The rain had started, light but persistent, and by the time I reached Thornhill, I was soaked through. I entered through the servants' door and nearly collided with Mrs. Hartley in the corridor. Good heavens, Miss Ashford, where have you been? You are drenched, and the Duke has been asking for you. Count Ricci left an hour ago, and his Grace has locked himself in his study. He looks, she paused, choosing her words carefully, troubled. I hurried to the study, knocked, and entered without waiting for permission. Gabriel was standing at the window, his posture rigid, one hand pressed against the glass as if he could push through it and escape into the rain. Gabriel, what happened? He did not turn around. Count Ricci knows we are investigating him. He knows we have contacted the Clarence Club, that we are searching the archives. Someone has been feeding him information. I felt my stomach drop. Who? I do not know yet. But there is a traitor in this house, Emily. Someone who has access to our correspondence, our plans. Someone who wants to see me fail. The implication hung heavy between us. It could be anyone. A servant with a grudge, a tenant hoping for a change in management, even Mr. Thornby, though I could not imagine the nervous solicitor engaging in such betrayal. What did the Count say? I asked. He made me an offer. If I stop fighting, if I accept the transfer peacefully and leave within the week, he will not pursue me for the legal costs of his claim. He will let me walk away with my personal belongings and a small stipend. Enough to live modestly, but nothing more. And if you refuse, then he will destroy me. He will drag this through the courts for years, bankrupting me with legal fees even if we eventually win. He will make certain that my name is dragged through every scandal sheet in England, that I am remembered not as the Duke who fought for his inheritance, but as the Duke who lost everything through his grandfather's stupidity and his own pride. Gabriel turned to face me finally, and I saw in his eyes something I had never seen before. Defeat. He was considering surrender, I realized with horror. He was weighing whether the fight was worth the cost. "You cannot give up," I said fiercely. "Not now. Not after everything we have found." "Have we found enough?" he asked quietly. "Evidence of cheating from 3 decades ago. Testimony that was suppressed and sealed. The word of an old translator in a village. Is that really enough to stand against a legal contract, an Italian court, and a family with unlimited resources?" "I do not know," I admitted. "But I know that if you surrender now, you will regret it for the rest of your life. This is your home, Gabriel, your legacy, your duty. You said it yourself. A duke sacrifices everything for responsibility. Well, this is the moment that defines whether you meant those words or whether they were just empty philosophy." His eyes flashed with anger, but beneath it, I saw the spark of fight returning. "You accuse me of being ready to quit. I accuse you of being human, of being afraid and tired and overwhelmed. But I also remind you of who you are. You are the Duke of Blackwood. You do not surrender. You do not break. And you do not let Italian con artists steal what is yours." We stood there in the rain-darkened study, tension crackling between us like lightning. Then, slowly, Gabriel smiled. "You are right. Of course you are right." He moved toward me, closing the distance until we were standing closer than propriety allowed. "You make me brave, Emily. You make me believe that impossible things might be possible after all." I looked up at him, my heart pounding, and knew that we were standing on the edge of a precipice. One more step, one more moment of weakness, and we would fall into something that could not be undone. But I did not step back. I did not want to. Gabriel reached out and tucked a wet strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my cheek. "If we win this," he said softly, "if we somehow defeat Ricci and save Thornhill, I am going to do something terribly improper." "What?" I whispered. "I am going to ask you to stay, not as a maid, not as a translator, but as something else, something that society will condemn and my peers will mock. But I find that I do not care any more about society or peers. I only care about you." Before I could respond, before I could tell him that I wanted that too, wanted it with a desperation that frightened me, the door burst open. Mr. Thornby stood there, wild-eyed and breathless. "Your Grace, you must come quickly. The stables are on fire, and they are saying it was deliberately set." The fire painted the night sky orange and red, smoke billowing into the rain-heavy clouds as we ran toward the stables. I could hear the horses screaming, that terrible sound of animal panic, and the shouts of grooms and stable hands as they fought to get the beast to safety. Gabriel ran ahead of me, his coat flying behind him, and I followed as quickly as my skirts would allow, my heart in my throat. By the time we reached the courtyard, half the stable block was engulfed. Men were forming a bucket line from the well, passing water hand to hand. But it was clear they were losing the battle. The flames were too fierce, too widespread. This was not an accident. This was destruction, deliberate and vicious. Gabriel immediately took command, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Get the horses out first. Forget the tack. Forget everything else. Just get the animals to safety." He grabbed a bucket and joined the line, working alongside his servants as if rank meant nothing in the face of disaster. I looked around desperately, trying to understand what had happened, and that was when I saw him. A figure standing at the edge of the courtyard, half hidden in shadows, watching the fire with satisfaction. I moved closer, and the light from the flames illuminated his face. James, one of the footmen. A young man who had always seemed resentful of his position, who had complained often about the Duke's demands and the long hours. "You," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You did this." He turned to look at me, and there was no remorse in his expression, only defiance. "The Count paid me well, better than the Duke ever did. He said if I helped him, if I kept him informed about what you were finding, he would give me a position in his household when Thornhill became his. You set fire to the stables. You could have killed the horses, killed the grooms. James shrugged. He told me to create a distraction. Something to keep the Duke occupied while he removed evidence from the archives. I did what I was paid to do. White-hot rage flooded through me. I had never struck another person in my life, but in that moment, I wanted to. Instead, I grabbed his arm and dragged him toward where Gabriel stood, still directing the firefighting efforts. "Your Grace, I have found your traitor." Gabriel turned, saw James, and his expression went deadly cold. He handed his bucket to another man and walked toward us, each step measured and controlled. "You work for Count Ricci," he said flatly. James lifted his chin. "I work for whoever pays me best, and that is not you." Gabriel's fist connected with James's jaw so quickly I barely saw it happen. The footman dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the ground. "Take him to the constable," Gabriel said to two of the grooms. "Tell them he is to be charged with arson and conspiracy. I will press full charges." As the men dragged James away, Gabriel turned to me. "You said he mentioned the archives. Ricci is removing evidence." I was already running before he finished speaking, racing back toward the main house. If the Count had access to the archives while we were distracted by the fire, he could destroy or steal anything that might prove his father's fraud. The journals, the Clarence Club records, Thomas Whitmore's folders, everything we had worked so hard to gather. I burst into the archives to find Count Ricci standing at the table, papers burning in a metal basin, smoke curling toward the ceiling. He looked up when I entered, utterly unperturbed by my presence. "Miss Ashford, how industrious of you to abandon the fire and rush to save your precious evidence. But I am afraid you are too late," he gestured to the burning papers. "Your grandfather's paranoid scribblings, your club records, all of it makes excellent kindling. You are destroying evidence of your father's crimes," I said, moving toward the basin. "I am destroying worthless papers that have no legal bearing on a contract that was properly executed and registered." He blocked my path, his smile cold. "Did you really think you could defeat me with the testimony of dead men and bitter old translators? I have been doing this for 2 decades, Signorina. I know every trick, every legal loophole, every way to protect my interests. Then why resort to arson and bribery?" I demanded. "If your case is so strong, why are you afraid of what we might find?" Something flickered in his expression. Annoyance, perhaps. Or the first crack in his confidence. "I am not afraid. I am simply thorough. When I take possession of Thornhill in 2 days, I want no lingering questions, no attempts to appeal or overturn the transfer. I want a clean victory." "It will never be clean," I said. "Whatever happens, everyone will know you cheated. They will know you are a con artist and a thief, just like your father." His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, squeezing hard enough to make me gasp. "You forget yourself, Signorina. You are a servant, a nobody. Your opinion means nothing. Release her." Gabriel stood in the doorway, his clothes streaked with soot, his eyes blazing with barely contained fury. Count Ricci turned, still holding my wrist, and smiled. "Your Grace. Come to watch your legacy burn. How appropriate," I said. "Release her. Now." The Count let go, but he did not step back. Instead, he moved closer to Gabriel, deliberate and challenging. "What will you do, Blackwood? Strike me as you struck your treacherous footman. That would be most undiplomatic. Assaulting a foreign nobleman carries serious consequences." "I do not need to strike you," Gabriel said coldly. "I need only expose you. And that is exactly what I intend to do." "With what evidence?" The Count gestured to the smoking basin. "It is all ash now. You have nothing." Gabriel smiled, and it was a terrible, triumphant expression. "You are wrong. We have everything." While you were busy bribing my footmen and setting fires, I was in contact with the Italian magistrate who sealed Paolo Bianchi's deposition in 1798. It turns out he is still alive, still serving, and still ashamed of being pressured by your family to suppress evidence of fraud. When I explained the situation and offered him immunity from any charges of corruption, he was remarkably cooperative. The deposition was unsealed this afternoon. It will arrive by express tomorrow morning, along with statements from 3 other men your father cheated at cards over the years. The Count's face went pale. That is impossible. The magistrate also provided records of payments your father made to witnesses, to club officials, to anyone who might have testified against him. It is all documented, all dated, all bearing official seals. Your father was not just a card sharp, Ricci. He was a systematic criminal who used his title and wealth to evade justice for decades. And you have followed in his footsteps. You cannot prove that I have done anything illegal, the Count said, but his voice lacked conviction now. Perhaps not, but I can prove your father did, and I can prove that the contract he forced my grandfather to sign was obtained through fraud and intimidation. That is grounds for invalidation under both English and Italian law. He pulled a document from inside his coat. This arrived 2 hours ago, a preliminary ruling from the High Court granting me an emergency injunction preventing any transfer of property until the fraud allegations are fully investigated. The investigation will take months, possibly years. And during that time, you will not set foot on my property, you will not touch my estate, and you will not profit from your father's crimes. The Count stared at the document, his composure finally cracking. This is not over, he said through clenched teeth. Oh, but it is. Gabriel stepped closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous and quiet. Here is what is going to happen, Ricci. You are going to return to Italy and pray that the authorities there do not decide to prosecute you for your role in suppressing evidence. You are going to leave England and never return. And if you ever attempt to claim Thornhill again, I will personally ensure that every newspaper in Europe knows exactly what kind of man you are. Your family name will be synonymous with fraud and dishonor. Is that clear? The Count said nothing, but his expression was answer enough. He shoved past Gabriel and left the archives, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like retreating thunder. When he was gone, the silence felt immense. Gabriel stood very still, staring at the door, and I watched the tension slowly drain from his shoulders. Then he turned to me, and I saw not triumph in his face, but exhaustion, relief, and something else, something that made my breath catch. Is it truly over? I whispered. For now. The legal battles will continue for some time, but the immediate threat is gone. Thornhill is safe. He walked to where I stood and took my hands in his, looking down at our joined fingers. You saved this estate, Emily. Not me. You. Your languages, your courage, your refusal to let me surrender. Without you, I would have lost everything. We saved it together, I said softly. No. You did this. He raised his eyes to meet mine. And now I am going to keep the promise I made in the study earlier. The terribly improper thing. Gabriel, I began, but he shook his head. Let me speak before I lose my courage. I know what society expects. I know the rules, the proprieties, the careful boundaries between our worlds. But I find that I do not care anymore. These past days have shown me that titles and rank mean nothing compared to character, intelligence, and heart. You have all 3 in abundance. And I have spent 7 years blind to your existence because I believed the lie that servants were somehow less than human, less deserving of notice or respect. I will not make that mistake again. What are you saying? I asked, though I knew, had known from the moment in the study when he touched my face. I am saying that I want you to stay at Thornhill, not as a maid, not as a translator, though your skills in that area are invaluable, but as my partner, my equal, my wife, if you will have me. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and perfect. I stared at him. This man who had been a distant figure for 7 years and who had become everything to me in the space of 4 days. My wife. He wanted to marry me. A duke wanted to marry a housemaid. "The scandal will be enormous," I whispered. "Undoubtedly. Your peers will condemn you. Society will shun us, very likely, and you do not care, not even a little." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look young and hopeful and free. "I have spent 17 years living for other people's expectations, Emily, for my father's rigid rules, for society's judgment, for the weight of duty and tradition. But you have shown me that there is another way to live. With honesty, with courage, with love. Yes, love. I love you, Emily Ashford. I love your mind, your strength, your refusal to be invisible even when the world demands it. And I would rather face scandal with you at my side than live another day in respectable loneliness without you." Tears were streaming down my face, hot and unchecked. No one had ever spoken to me like this. No one had ever seen me, truly seen me, the way Gabriel did. "I love you too," I said, my voice breaking. "I have loved you, I think, since the moment you said thank you in the entrance hall, since you saw me for the first time and chose to keep seeing me. Then marry me. We will face the scandal together. We will create a new kind of life, one where love matters more than station and character more than birth. Say yes, Emily." I thought of Thomas Whitmore's warning, of the price I would pay for this love. I thought of the servants who would never accept me as their mistress, of the society matrons who would cut me at every opportunity, of the whispers and judgment that would follow us for years. And I thought of Gabriel, this man who had risked everything to save his home and was now willing to risk it all again for me. The choice was impossibly simple. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled me into his arms then, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe, and I did not care. I pressed my face against his chest and felt his heart hammering beneath the soot-stained fabric of his shirt, as rapid as my own. We stood like that for a long time, in the archives where I had first found evidence of the Ricci fraud, surrounded by the smell of smoke and old paper and the lingering traces of victory. When we finally pulled apart, Gabriel kept one hand on my waist, as if afraid I might disappear. "We should go," he said. "The fire will be out by now, and I need to speak with the magistrate about James's arrest, and tomorrow we have a wedding to plan." "So quickly?" I asked, surprised. "I have wasted 7 years not knowing you, Emily. I do not intend to waste another day. If you are willing, we will marry by special license as soon as it can be arranged. A small ceremony, just us and the necessary witnesses. I do not need society's approval to make you my Duchess. Your Duchess." The words sounded fantastical, like something from a fairy tale, but this was real. This was happening. In a matter of days, I would go from invisible maid to the Duchess of Blackwood, from Emily Ashford to Emily Blackwood. We left the archives hand in hand, emerging into a courtyard that smelled of wet ash and victory. The fire was indeed out, the stables nothing but smoking ruins, but the horses were safe, the grooms unharmed. Damage that could be repaired, losses that could be replaced. Unlike the loss of Thornhill itself, which would have been irreparable. The servants were gathered in small groups, speaking in low voices, casting curious glances toward Gabriel and me. They could see that something had changed, that the relationship between the Duke and the housemaid had shifted into something they did not understand. Mrs. Hartley stood near the kitchen entrance, her expression a mixture of shock and resignation, as if she had been expecting this scandal but had hoped it would not come to pass. Gabriel raised his voice, addressing the assembled staff. The fire was deliberately set by James Caldwell, acting on behalf of Count Ricci. James has been arrested and will face full prosecution. The threat to Thornhill has been neutralized. The estate is safe, and tomorrow we will begin repairs to the stables. He paused, and his hand tightened on mine. "There is one more announcement. Miss Emily Ashford has agreed to become my wife. The wedding will take place within the week. I expect you all to treat her with the respect and courtesy due to the future Duchess of Blackwood." The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye fixed on me, on my soot-stained dress and wet hair, on my hand clasped in the Duke's. Then, slowly, one of the grooms began to clap. Others joined tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Not all of them. Mrs. Hartley stood stone-faced, and several of the older servants looked scandalized. But enough. Enough to show that perhaps, just perhaps, we might survive the scandal after all. The following days passed in a blur of activity. The magistrate arrived to take statements about the fire and James's confession. The unsealed deposition from Paolo Bianchi arrived, confirming everything Gabriel had told Count Ricci. The Italian had fled back to Naples, and word came that authorities there were investigating the Ricci family's business dealings over the past 2 decades. Thomas Whitmore visited to congratulate us and to tell me that he was proud of what I had accomplished. "You have done what Lord Pemberton could not," he said. "You have brought the Ricci family to justice. More than that, you have proven that courage and intelligence matter more than birth or station. Your father would have been proud. I helped plan my own wedding in stolen moments between everything else, choosing a simple dress because there was no time for anything elaborate, arranging for flowers from the estate gardens, inviting only Thomas and Mr. Thornby as witnesses. Gabriel wanted to announce it formally to society, to host a grand celebration, but I convinced him to wait. "Let us marry first," I said. "Let us become husband and wife in private, without the weight of expectation and judgment. We can face society together afterward, when we have had time to adjust to this new reality." On the morning of our wedding, 5 days after the fire, I stood in my small room under the eaves and looked at myself in the cracked mirror. The dress was cream-colored silk, borrowed from the estate's collection of historical costumes, altered to fit me by one of the housemaids who had defied Mrs. Hartley's disapproval to help. My hair was arranged simply, no elaborate curls or ornaments, just pulled back from my face in a way that felt honest and true. I thought of the girl I had been 7 years ago, desperate and alone, accepting a position as a scullery maid because the alternative was starvation. I thought of all the years I had spent invisible, unnoticed, believing that was my destiny. And I thought of how a single moment of courage, stepping forward to translate in the entrance hall, had changed the course of my entire life. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," I said. Gabriel entered, and the sight of him made my breath catch. He wore formal dress, black coat and gray waistcoat, his dark hair perfectly arranged. But it was his expression that undid me. Wonder and love and disbelief, as if he still could not quite believe this was happening. "You are beautiful," he said softly. "No, more than beautiful. You are radiant, and you are early. We are not supposed to see each other before the ceremony. I know, but I could not wait." He crossed the room and took my hands. "Emily, I need to say something before we go to the chapel, before we make these vows in front of God and witnesses. I need you to understand what you are agreeing to. The life of a duchess is not easy, even without the scandal of marrying a former maid. There will be demands, expectations, social obligations. You will be scrutinized constantly, judged for every word and gesture. And you will face cruelty from people who believe you do not deserve this position. I need to know that you are truly prepared for that." I squeezed his hands. "Gabriel, I spent 7 years being invisible, being nothing, being so insignificant that the people around me forgot I existed. I would rather face 1,000 scandals, 1,000 judgments, than go back to that emptiness. Yes, being your duchess will be difficult, but it will also be honest, real, mine. I am choosing this with eyes wide open." He pulled me close and kissed my forehead, my cheeks, finally my lips. A gentle kiss, reverent and tender, that spoke of promises and hope. "Then we will do this," he said, "together." The chapel at Thornhill was small and old, built 2 centuries ago by Gabriel's ancestors. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting colored patterns across the stone floor. Mr. Thornby stood near the altar, looking nervous and pleased. Thomas Whitmore sat in the front pew, beaming like a proud father. And the vicar, an elderly man who had known Gabriel since childhood, waited with a book of prayers and a knowing smile. We spoke the vows quietly, just for each other, words that bound us not by law or society, but by choice and love. When Gabriel slipped the ring onto my finger, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, I felt the weight of it not as a burden, but as a promise. I was no longer Emily Ashford, invisible maid. I was Emily Blackwood, Duchess of Thornhill, wife to the man I loved. The future stretched before us, uncertain and challenging. But as we walked out of the chapel into autumn sunlight, hand in hand, I knew that whatever came, we would face it together, as equals, as partners, as two people who had found each other across impossible divides and chosen love over every obstacle society could place in our path. That night, as we sat together in the library, his arm around my shoulders, a fire crackling in the grate, Gabriel asked me what I was thinking. I was thinking about my father, I said, about how he taught me languages because he believed words could bridge any gap. He was right. Language brought us together, gave me the tools to help you save Thornhill. But it was not just Italian or English that mattered. It was the language of courage, of standing beside someone when they needed you most. That is the language that truly saved us. He kissed my temple. You saved me in more ways than one, Emily. You saved my estate. But more importantly, you saved me from a life of isolation and duty without joy. You taught me that love is not a luxury. It is essential. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the rain begin again outside, the steady rhythm against windows a promise of renewal. Thornhill would be rebuilt, the stables would rise from their ashes, and we would create a life here, together, that honored both tradition and change. I would learn to be a duchess, to navigate society's treacherous waters, to face judgment and prejudice with the same courage I had shown in the archives. It would not be easy, but it would be mine. Ours. Sometimes, I thought. The greatest act of courage is not fighting against the world, but standing firm in who you are despite it. I had been invisible for so long because I believed that was all I deserved. But Gabriel had shown me otherwise. He had seen me, truly seen me, and found me worthy not just of notice, but of love. And in seeing me, he had given me permission to see myself differently. Not as a maid or a translator or any role defined by others, but as Emily, simply, completely, wholly myself. As the fire burned low and the rain continued its gentle song, I leaned my head against my husband's shoulder and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, in this moment, I was exactly where I belonged, home, seen, loved, free.